Good being in the Lord's house this morning. All right, grateful for the opportunity to teach Sunday school, and we'll endeavor to share something from the Lord this morning. Pieces out here. How's everybody this lovely day? All right. We're going to be reading from 2nd Chronicles. It'll be the lesson this morning. Actually, the lesson from the book. If you happen to have the book, maybe as a guide, we'll read some of that, but a lot of the other will not be out of the book. But the book had a lot of good things to say. We'll read from that. Second Chronicles chapter 18, and start in verse 6. Well, let's back up. We'll start start in 5. Therefore the king of Israel gathered together prophets, 400 men, and said unto them, Shall we go to Ramoth Gilead to battle, or shall I forbear? And they said, Go up, for God will deliver into the king's hand. But Jehoshaphat said, Is there not here a prophet of the Lord besides, that we might require of him? And the king of Israel said unto Jehoshaphat, There is yet one man by whom we may inquire of the Lord, but I hate him. For he never prophesied good to me, but always evil. His name is Micaiah, the son of Imlah. And Jehoshaphat said, Let not the king say so. And the king of Israel called for one of his officers and said, Fetch quickly Micaiah, the son of Imlah. And the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, sat either of them on his throne, clothed in the robes, and they sat in the void place in the entering of the gate of Samaria, and all the prophets prophesied before them. And Zedekiah, the son of Chiah, had made him horns of iron, and said, Thus saith the Lord, With these shalt thou push Syria until they be consumed. And all the prophets prophesied so, saying, Go up to Ramoth Gilead and prosper, for the Lord shall deliver it into the hand of the king. So we're meeting in the middle of a story here, and we can back the story up a little bit. It's a fairly interesting lesson. We're looking at the fourth king of Judah, who's the son of Asa. So Asa had passed away at a bit of a young age. It's a little bit of in the end of in chapter 15. If we look at chapter 15 and look at the death of Asa, and then on to 16, we see the beginning of at 16 we end in the death of Asa. At the end of 16 and the beginning of 17, we begin to look at Jehoshaphat and his reign. And Jehoshaphat's an interesting king coming from his father. He was one of the outstanding kings of Judah. He stood for all the things that characterize as a king of Judah. He is one of the 4 or 5 greater kings of Judah: David, Solomon, Hezekiah, Jehoshaphat. And he purged. His father had lost a little bit of the grip. Some of the high places had come in. Some of the groves there'd been some idol worship that had begun to take place at the end of his father's reign. And Jehoshaphat purges all this out, and he enacts one of David's original plans, which was to have the Levites to become teachers throughout the country. And he enacts this plan of making teachers and teaching the word of the Lord and teaching all of this. The law is taught. He walks after David's own heart, and he's paid a great tribute when it says that this is a man that followed after this, and he single-mindedly pursued the Lord. Certain of the Levites became itinerant preachers and traveled the land and taught the law and taught all that was to be done. And the Lord rewarded him. As we read through the chapters, and we read through 17, the Lord rewarded him with victories. The Lord rewarded him and the kingdoms around him began to fear Judah. They began to pay tribute. The classic kingdoms that we read about when we think about this, when you read through, and of course this story is told in two different books. We can read the book of the Kings, and then you can read Chronicles, and the story is told in two different accounts. And so we can read these two and piece together that the countries around Judah had feared Judah. They feared Jehoshaphat. The Philistines paid tribute. All of these countries that classically they were at war with had come under subjection to them, and they brought this tribute. And the army increased size, and the army got bigger and stronger, and a lot of things was done. The numbers are pretty astounding. And Rehoboam's army had about 180,000 men. The army then grew under Asa. They had about a 500,000 man army, but Jehoshaphat's army was 1.1 million men of valor and in mobile units, and that's not counting those that were garrisoned in the fenced cities. So he had an army that kept the city safe, and then he had a 1.1 million man army that was mobile, that could attack. So a very great king with a very great army, and had a lot of things that he had the ability to do. But we get here in chapter 18, and we meet a bit of a different aspect. Looking at chapter 18, we're reintroduced to a couple of figures that we know quite well, or one figure that we know quite well. We see here in chapter 18 and verse 1, the setting of the story is Jehoshaphat had riches and honor in abundance, and joined affinity with Ahab. And after certain years he went down to Ahab to Samaria. And Ahab killed sheep and oxen for him in abundance, and for people that he had with him, and persuaded him to go with him to Ramoth Gilead. And Ahab king of Judah said unto Jehoshaphat king of Ahab king of Israel said unto Jehoshaphat king of Judah, Wilt thou go with me to Ramoth Gilead? For he answered him, I am as thou art, and my people are as thy people, and we will be there with thee in the war. And Jehoshaphat said unto the king of Israel, Inquire, I say thee, at the word of the Lord today. So Jehoshaphat had lived his life to this point. He had followed God. He had been blessed. He had done all the commandments, had done all these things. But we get to a point here to where he's at a place where he's been blessed, and for whatever reason, he assumes friendship with Ahab. Now, in one aspect, this makes sense. And in one aspect, if you look here at where they are, and if you look at the historical aspect of where they're at, they were once one nation, just a few kings before. Israel and Judah had been one nation. They had split up, and so there was a lot of kinship. There had been a lot of cities that had been divided. And in fact, that's part of what Ahab says when he comes to, or when he sends a message to Jehoshaphat and says, hey, Ramoth Gilead used to be part of us, but now the king of Syria has it, and he's kept it, and we need to go get it back. And that was the prompting for where this was, is that shared history that they used to have a few generations before, that shared history of who they were. And that's how Ahab kind of gets Jehoshaphat to join in with him. Ahab's looking at Jehoshaphat's great army. He's looking at his 1.1 million man army and says, this guy's got a nice army. He's winning all the wars that he's involved in. He's got everybody afraid of him, and Syria doesn't want to fight him. And I can't take on Syria myself, and I want to take Ramoth Gilead. And so what I want to do is I want to get him tied in with me. And so he throws a big party. They do a lot of, he kills a lot of sheep, kills a lot of oxen, gets and says, man, I'll do anything for you. Let's go together and let's fight this war, and let's do this, and let's form this alliance, and made it look like, and Jehoshaphat needed no one's help to achieve his greatness, but Ahab was trying to kind of pull him in and decide to do this. And so he decides to pay Ahab a visit, and the king receives him in this grand style and performs the sacrifices and does all these things. But Jehoshaphat had overlooked a couple of things, and in the attempt to try to combine the army, in the attempt to do these things, Jehoshaphat overlooks who Ahab was. Jehoshaphat overlooks who Ahab was known to be. This is well, and sometimes when we read the Bible stories and hear the Bible stories, we sometimes have to remember the timeline of them. This wasn't the beginning of Ahab's life. In fact, this is the very end of Ahab's life. This is the last story we'll hear about Ahab because, spoiler alert, Ahab dies really quickly here. But so this is the last story of Ahab. So you know who Ahab is. Jehoshaphat knows who Ahab is. Jehoshaphat knows who Jezebel is. It's no real secret who they are. It's no real secret that they're Baal worshipers. It's no real secret who they are. But Jehoshaphat ties this common history in together and decides to go and visit Ahab. And he's at this place where he's at. And you wonder why. Why did he feel like he need to go? You wondered why does he need to be there? You wonder why it is that he's in this place. Why does he form this evil alliance? Why does he form this together? Now, he had all that he needed, but sadly we see this as it happens to many others. We've been blessed by God in his faithfulness. He made the tragic mistake of joining the affinity with the king of Israel, Ahab. And he had studied. I mean, we know who Ahab was. He knew who Ahab was. They knew who the Ahab was. And the godly principles, he had none whatsoever. There was nothing. At some point, there's no redeeming value for Ahab. Ahab slowly loses all of this, whether it's the influence of Jezebel or Ahab itself, but certainly the combination. There was nothing redeeming about him. I mean, we're well past the story of Naboth. We're past all those other stories of Ahab that we know. We're past the story of them killing the prophets. We're past the story of we talked about the other day of the famine that lasted for 3.5 years. We're past all that. So we know who Ahab was, but yet he decides to join up with him. As much as he had been faithful, as much as Jehoshaphat had done, as much as Jehoshaphat had done for the Lord, we see him at the end joining up with a God-hating, devil-worshiping man. He had no godly principles whatsoever, and regularly Ahab had been rebuked by Elijah for his wickedness. But in his faithfulness, God had been faithful. But how many times, if we're not careful, that we do very similar things, that we do things that we should know better, and we team up, or we do these, and we find people that just because there's a little bit of commonality with them, just because of something that we do, we have to be careful of who our associations are with. Associations are important. Associations matter. I had studied for this, and I ran across something earlier this morning as I had thought about it, and I thought how important it was. And when we talk about how important it is who our associations are, we can look in I think it's Mark chapter 2. We have a man who Jesus heals because of his friends. It wasn't the faith of the man. It wasn't anything that the man did. But here he are. He's got 4 friends that carry a litter to the top of a house and tear the top of a house out and lower this man down and through. It was the faith of his friends. It was the association that man had in that story. And such as it is, that we have to remember our associations matter. Who we hang out with, what do we do matters. And here we are, we have Jehoshaphat making a bad association, and he was persuaded to go by Ahab to go do something that, as you read through this story, really doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, certainly, going to get Ramoth Gilead, going and taking that city, going and taking that back from Syria, that part made sense. But as you read through this story, and I had, of course, I've read this story in the past and knew the story, but in studying this, it was just very, it been pointed out, and looking through it, you just see it over and over, that obviously they knew that this wasn't the thing to do. We can actually, when we read through in 2 Chronicles 18, the same part that we had already read, in verse 5, therefore the king of Israel gathered together prophets, 400 men, and said unto them, shall we go to Ramoth Gilead to battle, or shall I prevail? And they said, go up, for God would deliver it into the king's hand. And the fact of all that, Jehoshaphat says, is there not a prophet of the Lord here besides? So in the middle of all this going on, we read that Jehoshaphat is like understanding, and that's the thing that struck me as I was reading through this, that Jehoshaphat understood that this wasn't the thing to do. But he goes and does it anyway. Now, we know a lot about him. We talked about his military might. We talked a lot about where he was at. He had been apparently historically says that he was co-regent. So as his father had gotten sick, and the Bible says that he had the disease of the feet. I'm not sure exactly which one of his feet got him, but whether it was he had slow congestive heart failure that slowly worsened, or whether he was diabetic and finally had foot disease that killed him. But for the last 2 years of his dad's reign, Jehoshaphat was co-regent. He was co-king and then assumed the kingdom. And then we talked about all the great things that he had done. We know quite a bit about Jehoshaphat. But in this verse, we meet Micaiah, someone that we know very little about. But he's the opposite part of the story here. As I studied through this and looked at the lesson here, I could really see these two people juxtaposition together, one side by side, and the differences in between the two. And that's our lesson today that we want to look at. If we look at Jehoshaphat, we know a lot about him. We know where he come from. We know what he did. We have all this history about him, and he really was a great guy. But at this one part, he makes a decision to be influenced by Ahab. He makes a decision to be influenced by those around him. He makes a decision that costs quite a bit. And somehow in the middle of all of this, and a guy that brings 1.1 million people, or a million men army, he brings a lot to the table. There's really no reason for this to have happened, but yet it does anyway. Somehow he's influenced, somehow he's pressured, whether it's peer pressure or, I'm here, and it's one of the more interesting things as you read through, and some of the commentators try to, figure out why did he make this decision. It's kind of one of those things, if we're not careful, it's one decision after another, one thing after another, and sometimes if we're not careful in our life, we'll get to be the same way. The old saying is throwing good money after bad. I've worked on this piece of equipment to the point I'm going to keep working on this piece of equipment, and I've got twice the amount that the piece of equipment is worth because I just keep working on it. You can't give up on it, or I've done this and we're just going to keep going. And that was apparently where Jehoshaphat was in this. He said, well, we've all packed our lunches and we all came over here to have a fight. Let's have a fight. It doesn't matter if it's the right thing to do or not. And sometimes if we're not careful, that pressure in our life, that place that we're at in our life, we have to sit back and reevaluate where we're at. God's, he's getting, Jehoshaphat's getting the signals that we really shouldn't be here and really shouldn't be doing this. I mean, there's 400 prophets there saying, go, go, go. And Jehoshaphat's like, just not really sure that's the right thing to do. And he doesn't listen to that conscience. He doesn't listen to that inner voice. And sometimes, I've been in the same place. I'm not going to say that I haven't made some of the same mistakes. Well, we're here. We're just going to keep going. I tell a story of it, and it was something very obvious of it. It's from a recent travel when I was in Morocco. We had been into the country and lost we obviously weren't going to do medical missions. They didn't want us being there, and we'd kind of gotten back to Casablanca, which was the city we were staying in that we had flown in and out of. And so we had an extra day or two that we hadn't planned on there. And so instead of sitting at the hotel, a lot of us decided, well, we'll take the train about 45 minutes in to the center of the city and take the train in and just see the town, kind of be a tourist for a little while, and maybe go shopping, pick up some souvenirs we'd all planned on. They had a nice central market, the central market, where it's the kind of really interesting to go and see the handmade crafts and those things, and that's what we were going to do. So we had rode the train in 45 minutes, and when we got to where we were going, we got to the center station in town, or in the city, and when we got there, the realization was we didn't need to be there. But here you are, you've got 18 people or so that we've paid $5 a piece to get on the train and ride the train into town. For 45 minutes, we sit and chatted and looked at the countryside, and now you're sitting in town, but on the way in, the State Department had put out a bulletin saying, don't be in crowds in Morocco. There's a big protest planned today for the Israel I'd say Hezbollah, but it's all of them together fighting at this point. The Israel and Gaza war, they had protests planned for it, and there was going to be a lot of civil disruption. And we get downtown, and you could kind of feel the energy of the place was where you wasn't supposed to be, that we're all standing there and going, now what do? We've all paid $5 to ride in. We'll have to pay $5 to ride back. But there's a lot of us there standing around, and finally it's like, I don't really care what everybody else wants to do. We need to go back. I mean, it's kind of hard to turn literally turn the train around. And sometimes it's that way in our life. We've kind of made decisions to get us to this point, and we're just the impetus of our decisions, just the sheer weight of all the things that we've got going on, just the sheer weight of all that's happening to this point, just that inertia of being there. If we're not careful, that inertia and that's what apparently happens in Jehoshaphat. It's just that inertia of all that I've got. I've got, 1,000,000 men behind him when we've all packed up and said goodbye, and we've got dreams in our head of going out and having a big fight and doing good things and having all this stuff happen. And I don't really want to stop doing that. And this, I don't want to look silly. I don't want to look foolish. I don't want to look like I don't know what I'm doing. Here I am, we got to have a fight now. And we're not careful, those same decisions will play a role in our life. I don't know that y'all have ever done those bad decisions like that, but I sure have. We go, this is what I'm going to do. I don't feel like it's the right thing to do, but I'm here now. Now I'm going to do it. Rarely is there a time that you wish you have not made that decision. Lord speaking to you and saying, don't do it. And you're like, well, a little bit of conscience in there. And it may not be something as Jehoshaphat was. And it may not be something that's, evil. It's not going to be something that's bad. It's not, it wasn't bad for Jehoshaphat to go take back Ramoth Gilead. It's not a bad thing to do for him to go fight that battle. It's not a bad thing for him to go fight the king of Syria that had occupied territory that belonged to Israel. It wasn't a bad thing to do, but for Jehoshaphat, it was a bad time to do it and a bad person to do it with. So we have to understand that's where Jehoshaphat was in this place. And he understood clearly, if you read through this and read through the king's account of this in 1 King, we can see this. We can see this out. In 1 Kings chapter 20 and verse 35, and a certain man of the sons of prophets said unto his neighbors of the Lord, smite me. Sorry, let me back up a little bit. So here we are, as we see here, as we read in 2 Chronicles, there's Micaiah. The king of Israel hates Micaiah. There's a reason behind them. They've got a bit of a history, apparently, if you read through. There's a reason why Ahab doesn't like this guy. He's prophesied for him before, and it was not a very pretty prophecy as he gives him. We can see the prophecy and say, and we read in 2 Kings chapter 20 and verse 35. Now, this is before the story where we're at in 1 Kings chapter 22. That's the chapters that line up with 2 Chronicles chapter 18. They tell the same story. If we back up a little bit before into 1 Kings chapter 20, this is the story of what's going on and why Micaiah and Ahab do not like each other. There's a prophet that says, we'll read that story. A certain man of the son of the prophets, who apparently was Micaiah, said unto his neighbor at the word of the Lord, smite me, I pray thee. And the man refused to smite him, and then said unto him, because thou hast not obeyed the voice of the Lord, behold, as soon as thou depart from me, a lion shall slay thee. And as soon as he was departed from him, a lion found him and slew him. Then he found another man, said, smite me, I pray, men. And the man smote him, so that in smiting him he wounded him. So the prophet departed and waited for the king by the way, disguised himself with ashes upon his face. And the king passed by, and he cried unto the king and said, thy servant went out into the midst of the battle, and behold, a man turned aside and brought a man unto me and said, keep this man. If by any means he be missing, then shall thy life be for his life, or else thou shalt pay a talent of silver. And as the servant was busy here and there, he was gone. And the king of Israel said unto him, so shall thou judgment me, thou hast decided it. And he hastened and took the ashes away from his face, and the king of Israel discerned him that he was one of the prophets. And he said unto him, the prophet said unto the king, thus saith the Lord, because thou hast let go out of thy hand a man whom I am appointed to utter destruction, therefore thy life shall go for his life, and thy people for his people. And the king of Israel went to his house heavy and displeased, and came into Samaria. And it was the king Ahab had been fighting. I believe it was Ben-Hadad, and God had delivered. He was using Ahab, despite his wickedness. God was using Ahab to offer deliverance to the people of Israel, and they had captured Ben-Hadad, and Ahab allows him to buy his life and to ransom himself out. And so on his way home, the prophet Micaiah, was sitting by the roadside and says unto him, because thou let him go, you're going to die. His life for thy life, thy people for his people. So there was a bit of a history between King Ahab and this prophet already. This is probably why Ahab didn't like him. However, one thing we know about Micaiah is that he wasn't afraid to tell the truth. He wasn't afraid to buck the crowd. Now, setting the scene and telling the story here, I've read a good bit because I want you to kind of get the picture of where we're at. We've got two kings. There's a big city, the capital city of Israel, Samaria. They've opened the gates of the city. They've had this grand party. They've slain and sacrificed, and they've had a feast, and all these things has happened. And Ahab finally talks Jehoshaphat in, and they've set their two thrones up. They've got the two thrones set up, and they're sitting there in all their royal finery, and two kings sitting there together talking and chatting. And there's this 1,000,000-man army that Judah has brought, and Israel's army's there as well. So you've got all these men there. You've got 400 prophets that have came, and they've been talking and prophesying and saying all the good things about all this. So get this setting in your mind as we're there. All this stuff's going on, and Jehoshaphat says, is there not yet? And the king of Israel says, yeah, there's this guy. I hate him, but we'll listen to what he has to say. So in verse 12, the messenger that went to call Micaiah spake to him, saying, behold, the words of the prophet declare good unto the king with one assent. Let thy word, therefore, I pray thee, be like one of theirs, and speak good. And Micaiah said unto the Lord, as the Lord liveth, even what my God saith, that will I speak. So as they're walking up, as the messenger that the king sent to go get the prophet is walking him up to the king, he's saying, look, dude, he says, man, everybody else has said good things. You got 400 people saying this, that they should go fight. Just live and let live. Just let it ride. Just let it go. You see all this that's going on? There's that 1,000,000-man army. There's our army. There's 400 prophets. The whole city's here. We've done all this stuff. Just let it ride. Just go with it. And Micaiah says, what the Lord says, that's what I'll speak. And when he had come to the king, in verse 14, the king said unto him, Micaiah, shall we go to Ramoth-Gilead to battle, or shall I forbear? And he said, go up ye and prosper, that they shall be delivered into thy hand. The king said unto him, how many times shall I endure thee, that thou sayest nothing but the truth to me in the name of the Lord? And he said, I did see all Israel scattered upon the mountains as sheep that have no shepherd. And the Lord said, these have no master. Let them return therefore every man unto his house in peace. And the king of Israel said unto Jehoshaphat, did I not tell thee that he would not prophesy good unto me, but evil? Again he said, therefore hear the word of the Lord. I saw the Lord sitting upon his throne, and all the hosts of heaven standing on his right hand and on his left. And the Lord said, who shall entice Ahab king of Israel, that he may go up and fall at Ramoth-Gilead? And one said, after this matter, and another saying, after this matter. And there came a spirit that stood before the Lord and said, I will entice him. And the Lord said unto him, wherewith? And he said, I will go out and be a lying spirit into the mouth of all the prophets. And the Lord said unto him, thou shalt entice him, and thou shalt prevail. Go up and do even so. And therefore the Lord hath put a lying spirit in the mouth of these prophets, and the Lord hath spoken evil against thee. So in the middle of all of this, in the middle of all that's going on, and I guess that's what stood out to me most of all, in of all of this is here we are in the middle of all this. We have two kings that understand they really shouldn't be doing what they do. Ahab understood that he shouldn't be doing what he was doing, and more importantly, Jehoshaphat understood that he shouldn't be doing what he was doing. They question even when the prophet comes and says, hey, go do what you want to do. And they understand that you're not being truthful and you're being sarcastic, and the tone is there. And he said, put aside, tell us what the Lord said. And he gives them the Lord's prophecy, but yet and still they decide to do even what it is that they'll do. And to the point that Ahab says, put this man in jail and put him away and don't feed him. If you'll look at verse 26, put this fellow into prison and feed him with bread of affliction and water of affliction till I return in peace. Micaiah said, if thou certainly return in peace, then Then hath not the Lord spoken by me? And he said, Hearken, all ye people. So he looks, the one prophet, there's 400 of them there. Their one prophet says, Hearken, all ye people, 1.1 million man army of Judah, you army of Israel, you king of Samaria, you king of Israel, you king of Judah, you city of Samaria. Hearken to what I said. The king of Israel will not come back home today. So the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, went up to Ramoth Gilead, and the king of Israel said unto Jehoshaphat, I will disguise myself. I kind of didn't like what the prophet had to say. That kind of scared me a little bit. So I'm going to put on, I'll go to battle and put on thy robes. So the king of Israel disguised himself, and they went to battle. Now the king of Syria had commanded the captains of the chariots that were with him, saying, Fight ye not with small or great, save only with the king of Israel. And it came to pass, when the captains of the chariots saw Jehoshaphat, that they said, It is the king of Israel. Therefore they compassed about him to fight. But Jehoshaphat cried out, and the Lord helped him, and God moved them to depart from him. For it came to pass that when the captains of the chariots perceived it was not the king of Israel, they turned back again from pursuing him. And a certain man drew a bow at a venture, and smote the king of Israel between the joints of the harness. Therefore he said unto his chariot man, Turn thine hand, that thou mayest carry me out of the host, for I am wounded. And the battle increased that day. Howbeit the king of Israel stayed himself up in his chariot against the Syrians until the evening, and about the time of the sun going down, he died. And Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, returned to his house in peace to Jerusalem. So of the two men that we have there, of the three men of the story, there's two of them that know that they're doing wrong, and one of them that chooses to do right. For this they suffer. Ahab knows the truth. Jehoshaphat knows the truth, but they're cowed by the circumstances around them, and they won't change their direction. They let the momentum of this developing battle stand in the way of the good sense that they have. They let the momentum of what they've got going wrong. They let the momentum of bad decisions catch up with them as they continue, and instead of turning right, they get peer pressure and they turn, and this carries them. For this they suffer. For Ahab, this is his last error that Ahab will make. This is the last point in Ahab's life. How much does God love us that even if he takes Ahab, and the one last time before Ahab goes, God warns him over and over, and he sends a prophet that's there and says, Don't do this. This is what's going to happen. Ahab goes and does it anyway, but yet he does it over a man of God telling him not to do it. And this is a grave mistake, and this is the last mistake that Ahab makes. This is the last of Ahab's story. He goes out on a very sour note, having done everything that he could do to run over the will of the Lord, having done everything that he could do to run over the mercies of the Lord. Over and over in Ahab's life, we have prophet after prophet that comes. We have time after time that God gives him chance. But over and over, we see Ahab overrunning, and this last overrunning of Ahab's conscience, this last overrunning of what he's did, this last overrunning of what it is what cost him. Jehoshaphat goes back to his turn, and he as he returns to his house in peace. And we can read on to the story of Jehoshaphat, of how they sing, and God offers deliverance for him, but yet he makes the same mistake again. If you read the very end of Jehoshaphat's life, he makes a very similar mistake of where he's at. But we can look at those two stories, but we could also look at the third man in our story that's there. We can look at a man who has truth on his side. We have a man that has truth. It doesn't matter that Jehoshaphat should have immediately pulled out of this situation. He should have pulled out when he's got somebody that literally hates God and literally hates everything that Jehoshaphat stands for. He realizes that he should have pulled out. He should have pulled away from where he's at. But yet we have this man of God called Micaiah, the prophet of the Lord, that told them, and the prophet of all this else that's going on. He stands there and he delivers truth. He stands there in that place and he offers truth and gives truth. It doesn't matter that anybody likes it. It doesn't matter what everybody else wants him to do. It doesn't matter what the circumstances are around him. It doesn't matter how he's surrounded. It doesn't matter what everybody else is saying. It doesn't matter that everybody else is headed in the wrong direction. He knows what's right, and he stands for it. In the middle of all these things, he stands for what he knows is right. He insists on rocking the boat. Not only does he rock the boat, he blows the bottom of the boat out with a torpedo. He says, this is not what's right. Doesn't matter if you like me, doesn't matter what happens, doesn't matter if you throw me in jail, doesn't matter if you lock me away. This isn't the right way. This is not right. If this isn't God's will, all you people should go back to your houses. Every one of you should go back. Jehoshaphat, pack your throne up, roll your robes back and put them back in their traveling cases, grab your 1 million man army, get back across the border and stay where you're supposed to be. Ahab, close the gates of this city, put your men back up, pack up the leftovers in Tupperware, put them in the refrigerator, end this party, and get done with this. But none of them make that decision. But we have a man that, despite all of that, says, this is the right way. Stand ye in it. This is the truth. I'll not set aside the old landmarks. I won't turn aside just because everybody else is. I won't push away because everybody else has decided this is the newfangled way. I will not stand away just because everybody else decides you don't have to live that way anymore. I won't stand aside and say, you can do something different. You can do it your own way. We were wrong for all these generations. Everybody else was misguided. Everybody else didn't know what they were doing. Everybody else was wrong. All the church fathers got it all wrong. We don't have to live that way. We had a man that says, nope, this is still the right way. Doesn't matter that everybody else is pointed in the wrong way. And it's a very somewhat confusing story when the 400 prophets, which were probably the prophets of the school of the prophet that are there, and Micaiah tells what had happened in the halls of heaven of what had happened. But it's a bit of a concerning, hard to understand story. But the realization was that everybody knew that the prophets weren't telling right. Everybody knew that's what it was. The prophets themselves knew that they weren't right. The king knew that what they were saying wasn't right, but yet they continue on in their error. But we're reminded that over and over this happens. Who we hang out with, who we associate with, who we business with, sometimes and always makes a difference. Sometimes, if we're not careful, that we get into a continuation of this is where we're at and this is what will go. But we have to be the ones that stay the course. We have to be the ones that stand for truth. We have to be the one that stands up for what is right and not override the conscience. We have to be the one that says, as Nathan did, "Thou art the man." When the king of Israel, when King David had made the decision and had Uriah killed, you had a prophet that was willing to stand up and say, "Thou art the man." God is still looking for those that will stand for truth and for godliness in spite of a changing world around us. He's looking for those who will buckle on the armor and fight the good fight. He's looking for those that will continue on. He says in 1 Timothy, we can read in 1 Timothy 1:18, This charge I commit to thee, my son Timothy, according to the prophecies which went before on thee, that thou by them mightst war a good warfare, holding faith and a good conscience, which some, having put away concerning faith, have made shipwreck. And there are those around us, Paul's saying to Timothy, there's those around you that used to live one way, used to have a faith that they've put away. They've decided they don't need to do it, and they've made themselves shipwreck. He says, Timothy, fight a good fight, lay hold on eternal life, wherefore thou art also called and hath professed a good profession before many weaknesses. And the verse before in 6 and 11 says, But thou, O man of God, flee these things, follow after righteousness, godliness, faith, love, patience, meekness. Fight the good fight of faith, lay hold on eternal life, whereunto thou art also called, and hath professed a good profession before many weaknesses. We are to be the salt and the light of the world. Sometimes, as the Bible says, salt's lost its savor, and henceforth where is it good to be thrown out and trodden under the foot of men. Sometimes, when we're the salt of the world, sometimes we've got a nice sweet savor. Sometimes we have the ability to be what people want to hear. We have the ability to be the one that, as they're hurting, we get to be the one that comes up beside them and offer a hand in prayer and offer the love of God and pray for them and help with the healing and help with that process. And sometimes we're the salt in an open wound. People don't like it when you're there. They get upset when you're there, but we hold on to the faith that we have. We hold on to where we're at and be the one that stays the course. Amen. Good to be with you this morning.